Campfire. True Horror Stories. Story number 1. The Whispering Woods. Deep in the heart of a dense, ancient forest, a group of friends set up their campsite. As night fell, they heard faint whispers in the rustling leaves and the distant, eerie laughter of children. The unsettling feeling grew stronger, and soon, shadowy figures began to appear among the trees. No matter how fast they ran, they couldn't escape the sinister presence. At dawn, they discovered they were back at their campsite, trapped forever in the Whispering Woods. Story number 2. The Haunted Campfire. A lone camper ventured into a remote wilderness area and set up camp near an old, abandoned cabin. In the dead of night, while sitting by the campfire, he heard footsteps approaching. He called out, but no one answered. The footsteps circled closer, and suddenly, a ghostly figure appeared in the firelight, its hollow eyes staring into his soul. Frozen in fear, he realized that the spirit was the ghost of a camper who had disappeared in the same spot years ago, forever doomed to wander the woods. Story number 3. The Uninvited Camper. A couple arrived at their favorite campsite, only to find another tent already pitched nearby. Assuming it was a fellow camper, they decided not to disturb them. As night fell, strange sounds echoed from the neighboring tent. Whispers turned into blood-curdling screams, and they couldn't ignore it any longer. When they unzipped the tent, they found it empty, except for a journal filled with frantic entries about an uninvited presence stalking the author. Terrified, they fled, leaving the cursed campsite behind. Story number 4. The Vanishing Lake. A group of friends decided to camp beside a serene, moonlit lake nestled in a remote valley. In the middle of the night, they were awakened by the sound of their tents shaking violently. Rushing outside, they watched in horror as the entire lake seemed to drain away before their eyes, revealing an immeasurable abyss beneath. The ground beneath their campsite crumbled, and they were all swallowed by the darkness below, leaving no trace behind. Story number 5. The Cursed Campfire Song. A family went camping in a seemingly peaceful forest. One night, they gathered around the campfire and started singing a song they found in an old journal they discovered at the site. As they sang, the trees began to sway ominously, and the wind carried their tune deeper into the woods. Suddenly, ghostly apparitions emerged from the shadows, joining in the song. The family fled in terror, but the haunting melody haunted them for the rest of their lives. Story number 6. The Skinwalker's Campsite. A solo camper set up their tent in a remote desert canyon. As night fell, they heard eerie, unnatural sounds echoing in the distance. Soon, they realized they were not alone. Shapes in the darkness moved with unnatural agility, and glowing eyes watched from the cliffs above. It became clear that they had camped on sacred ground, inhabited by sinister skinwalkers. They barely escaped with their life, but the experience left them forever haunted by the memory of those piercing eyes. Story number 7. The Abandoned Camp. A group of friends stumbled upon an old, abandoned camp deep in the woods. Curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to spend the night there. As they settled in, they discovered a diary filled with disturbing entries recounting bizarre occurrences. Soon, the same eerie events started happening to them. Ghostly whispers, moving shadows, and unseen hands touching their faces. They fled in terror, realizing they had camped at a place forsaken by something far more sinister. Story number 8. The Wendigo's Curse. A lone backpacker ventured into the frozen wilderness of the northern tundra. One frigid night, they were awakened by a haunting, guttural growl. Peering outside their tent, they saw a grotesque, skeletal creature with antlers, the infamous Wendigo. Frozen with fear, they knew they were cursed. The Wendigo's presence haunted their every step, whispering madness into their ears, until they too became a Wendigo, destined to haunt those woods forever. Story number 9. The Lost Camper. A woman set out on a solo camping trip in a remote mountain range. After a long day of hiking, she returned to her campsite, only to find it completely different from how she left it. Bewildered and disoriented, she realized she had somehow entered a parallel dimension of her campsite. Desperate to find her way home, she wandered through a distorted, nightmarish version of the woods, pursued by sinister doppelgangers and grotesque creatures from the other side. Story number 10. The Vengeful Spirits of Hollow Lake. A group of friends camped beside Hollow Lake, a place notorious for its tragic history. As they sat around the campfire, they heard faint cries for help echoing across the water. Ignoring the pleas was impossible, so they ventured onto the lake in a canoe, guided by ghostly lights. Suddenly, hands from beneath the water began to pull them downward, dragging them into the depths where the vengeful spirits of the lake sought revenge for past wrongs. Story number 11. The Forest of Malevolent Statues. A solo hiker ventured deep into an ancient forest and stumbled upon a peculiar clearing filled with eerie stone statues. Each statue seemed to depict a moment of fear or despair. As night fell, the statues came to life, their cold stone eyes fixed on the hiker. They whispered dark secrets and threatened to turn the hiker into a statue like them. With great effort, the hiker fled the cursed forest, forever haunted by the memory of those dreadful stone faces. Story number 12. The Beast of the Blackwood. A family embarked on a camping trip to the ominous Blackwood Forest. In the middle of the night, they heard terrifying growls and rustling outside their tent. Peering out, they caught a glimpse of a monstrous creature, half man and half beast, with red eyes and gnarled claws. It circled their campsite, toying with their fear. Desperate to escape, they left behind their belongings and fled, but the creature's menacing laughter echoed through the trees as they ran. Story number 13. The Haunted Campground. A group of campers arrived at a seemingly idyllic campground. As night descended, they gathered around the campfire and heard faint cries for help in the distance. Following the sounds, they stumbled upon a hidden burial ground, marked by eerie gravestones. Suddenly, ghostly apparitions emerged, accusing them of disturbing their eternal rest. The campers fled, but the spirits followed, seeking vengeance for trespassing on their sacred grounds. Story number 14. The Cabin in the Deep Woods. A couple rented a remote cabin for a romantic getaway. On the first night, they heard heavy footsteps on the cabin's roof. Terrified, they ventured outside to investigate, only to discover large, clawed footprints leading into the woods. The cabin's walls started to tremble, and a blood-curdling scream echoed from within. They realized the cabin itself was alive and malevolent. In a desperate escape, they left behind their belongings and ran, leaving the cursed cabin behind. Story number 15. The Ghostly Campfire Circle. A group of friends set up camp in a secluded forest clearing known for its tranquil beauty. One evening, as they gathered around the campfire, they saw faint, ethereal figures in the distance, forming a circle around them. The ghostly campers joined their fire, whispering chilling tales of their own camping tragedies. As the night wore on, the figures slowly faded, leaving the friends alone and forever haunted by their spectral encounter. Story number 16. The Lost Hikers. Two experienced hikers ventured deep into an unfamiliar wilderness area. On the second day, they found themselves in an eerie, fog-covered valley. They attempted to retrace their steps but soon realized they were trapped in a labyrinthine maze of dense mist. Strange, shadowy figures emerged from the fog, beckoning them further into the abyss. Days turned to weeks as they wandered, eventually vanishing into the eternal fog, their fate unknown. Story number 17. The Forbidden Cave. A group of adventurous campers discovered an uncharted cave in a remote desert canyon. Eager to explore, they ventured deep inside, their flashlight beams revealing ancient hieroglyphs warning of a curse. Ignoring the warnings, they pressed on. Suddenly, the cave's entrance sealed shut behind them, trapping them in the pitch-black darkness. Malevolent whispers echoed, and eerie apparitions appeared, tormenting them until they, too, became cursed guardians of the Forbidden Cave. Story number 18. The Campsite of the Forgotten. A lone camper stumbled upon an abandoned campsite deep in the woods, its tents weathered and belongings scattered. Curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to spend the night. As darkness fell, they heard faint whispers and eerie laughter coming from the forest. Suddenly, shadowy figures emerged from the trees, the lost souls of campers who vanished in this very spot years ago. They pleaded for help, but the camper could only watch in horror as they faded away, trapped in a perpetual nightmare. Story number 19. The Haunting Melody. A group of friends gathered around the campfire, when a haunting melody drifted through the night air. They followed the sound to a nearby clearing, where an old music box sat on a tree stump. Mesmerized, they wound it up, and the music grew louder. With each note, the forest came alive with ghostly apparitions, dancing to the eerie tune. As the music box played on, The friends realized they were becoming part of the spectral dance, unable to break free from the cursed melody. Story number 20. The Mysterious Fog. A family set up camp on the shores of a remote lake. One morning, an inexplicable fog rolled in from the water, shrouding their campsite. They couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction, and unsettling sounds echoed through the mist. When the fog finally lifted, they found themselves miles from their original campsite, with no memory of how they got there. It was as though they had been transported to another world, and the eerie experience left them forever changed. The end.